The suffocating feeling that you are fighting the world alone is not a flaw in you. It is your body sensing that the invisible barrier between you and the universe is collapsing right now. But if quantum physics has already proven that physical separation is an absolute illusion, why does your mind keep torturing you with this silent loneliness? What will happen to your reality when this final wall completely breaks tonight? Something in you already knows the answer. That quiet tension you feel is not weakness. It is pressure from a truth trying to surface. You were taught to see yourself as separate, to believe your life begins and ends within your skin, but that idea is starting to crack. Tonight is not just another night. It is a shift in how you experience being alive, not by effort, but by seeing clearly. And once you see it, even for a second, you cannot fully go back. You know that horrible feeling of being in a room full of people, or giving your best every single day, and still feeling completely disconnected, as if there were a glass wall between you and life. This is not a psychological weakness. It is the brutal friction generated by a mind that has been programmed to believe that your existence ends where your skin does. And what makes this even more unsettling is how normal it has become. You've learned to function with it, to smile, respond, perform, and even succeed while carrying this quiet distance inside you. It doesn't always scream. Most of the time it whispers. It shows up in the pause before you speak, in the second guessing after you share something real, in the strange sense that no matter how close someone gets, they never quite reach you. Or maybe it's the other way around. You never quite reach them. This silent symptom is easy to ignore because it doesn't break your life apart in obvious ways. You can still go to work, maintain relationships, complete tasks. On the surface, everything looks intact, but underneath, there is a constant tension, like holding your breath without realizing it, a subtle contraction in your chest, a background noise of disconnection that never fully turns off. What you were never told is that this feeling is not proof that you are alone. It is the side effect of believing in the illusion of separation so deeply that your entire system has adapted to it. Your thoughts, your reactions, even your sense of identity have been shaped around this invisible assumption. I am here, and everything else is out there. But pause for a moment and notice something simple. Even now, as you read this, there is an awareness in you that is observing these words. That awareness is not divided. It doesn't have edges. It doesn't stop at your skin. Yet your mind keeps translating everything through the filter of separation, turning a seamless experience into fragments. This is where the friction begins, because part of you already senses that the illusion isn't fully true. That's why the disconnection feels so uncomfortable. If separation were natural, you wouldn't question it. You wouldn't feel this subtle resistance. The discomfort is not a flaw. It's a signal, a sign that something in you is starting to notice the mismatch between what you've been taught and what you actually are. Think about the moments when the glass wall seems to thin out. Maybe it's when you're deeply focused on something you love, or when you're fully present with someone and for a brief second, there's no distance, just a shared experience without effort. In those moments, the symptom disappears, not because you fixed anything, but because the illusion loosened its grip. And then the mind returns. It starts labeling, analyzing, comparing. It rebuilds the wall piece by piece, using thoughts as bricks. Do they understand me? Am I doing this right? What do they think of me? Each question reinforces the idea that you are separate, that there is a gap to close, a distance to manage. Without realizing it, you participate in maintaining the very barrier that causes the pain. This is why ignoring the symptom keeps it alive. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you've never been shown how to look at it differently. You were taught to fix it, distract from it, or push through it, but rarely to observe it directly. And here's where things begin to shift. Because the moment you stop treating this feeling as a personal defect and start seeing it as a byproduct of the illusion, something changes in your relationship with it. The pressure softens, the urgency to escape it decreases. You begin to notice it instead of being consumed by it. But this creates a new kind of tension, one that most people aren't prepared for. If this disconnection isn't real in the way you thought, then why does it feel so convincing? Why does your mind keep pulling you back into it over and over again, And more importantly, what happens if you stop trying to fix the feeling altogether? Because everything you've been taught up until now points you in one direction, outward, toward solutions, validation, connection, answers. But what if that instinct, the constant reaching, is exactly what keeps the illusion in place? That's where the next layer reveals itself, and it may challenge everything you've assumed about how to feel whole again. To try to heal this emptiness, we have been taught to seek connection outside ourselves. But pay close attention to this danger. Every time you desperately try to reach something, whether it's validation or peace, you send a signal confirming to the quantum field that you are separate from it. You are feeding the very prison you are trying to escape. There is a way to deactivate this, but first we need to see what your eyes are hiding from you. This pattern is so deeply ingrained that it feels like common sense. When you feel alone, you look for people. When you feel lost, you look for answers. When you feel restless, you look for something to fix or fill the space. It seems logical. It even feels necessary. But beneath this automatic movement, there is an assumption quietly running your entire life. What I need is not here. And that assumption is the core of the illusion. Because every time you act from that place, even in small ways, you reinforce the idea that fulfillment exists somewhere else, in someone else's approval, in a future moment, in a version of yourself that you haven't become yet. The mind keeps projecting completion outward, like a horizon that keeps moving the closer you get. You might recognize this cycle. You finally receive the validation you were craving, and for a brief moment something relaxes inside you. But it doesn't last. Soon the feeling fades and the search begins again. Not because you failed, but because the strategy itself is built on a false premise. You are trying to solve an internal distortion by rearranging external conditions. And the more effort you put into this, the more convincing the illusion becomes. It's subtle. You don't notice it happening. It hides behind things that seem positive: self-improvement, ambition, connection. But underneath there is often a quiet urgency, a sense that something is missing right now and must be found. That urgency is the signal. It tells you that your actions are being driven not by clarity, but by separation. Take a moment and look at how this plays out in real time. Imagine you send a message to someone and they don't respond right away. Almost instantly, your mind starts moving outward. Did I say something wrong? Are they ignoring me? What should I do now? Your attention leaves your body and attaches itself to an external outcome. Your sense of stability becomes dependent on something outside your control. In that moment, the illusion tightens, not because of the situation itself, but because of the way your awareness is being pulled away from its center. You are no longer experiencing life directly. You are chasing it, trying to close a gap that your own mind is creating. And here is the part that most people never stop to question. What if the gap doesn't actually exist? What if the feeling of distance is not something to overcome, but something being generated in real time by the act of seeking? This is where things start to shift, but also where resistance appears. Because if you stop reaching, even for a moment, it can feel uncomfortable, almost like letting go of control. The mind reacts quickly, saying, "If I don't do something, nothing will change." So it pushes you back into action, back into searching, back into trying to fix. But notice this carefully. Has all that searching truly resolved the feeling, or has it just kept it moving? There is nothing wrong with wanting connection, growth, or peace. The problem is not the desire. The problem is the belief that these things exist outside of you, waiting to be acquired. That belief forces you into a constant state of pursuit, and in that pursuit, you overlook what is already present. Because while your attention is focused on getting there, you are not here. And here is the only place where the illusion can actually dissolve. But this is where your perception has been trained to mislead you. Your senses seem to confirm separation. Your eyes show you distance. Your body feels like a boundary. Everything appears to reinforce the idea that you are an isolated point moving through a world of other isolated things. So even if part of you begins to question the pattern of external seeking, another part insists that separation is simply reality. And this is exactly where we need to look next, because what you see, What you feel, and what you have always trusted as solid and real may not be what you think it is at all. Cutting-edge science has already documented this. What you call empty space between you and the screen you are watching right now is actually a dense ocean of pulsating energy. The atoms in your hands never truly touch anything due to magnetic repulsion. If you have never physically touched anything in your life and are made of pure energy, what exactly is your brain using to isolate you from the rest of the world? At first, this may sound abstract, almost too distant from your daily experience. After all, your senses tell a very different story. You see solid objects, you feel surfaces, you move through what appears to be a world made of clearly defined boundaries. Your body feels like a container, and everything else seems to exist outside of it. That perception feels undeniable, but what you are experiencing is not reality in its raw form. It is a translation. Your brain is constantly receiving electrical signals and converting them into a simplified model that helps you survive. It takes an overwhelming field of energy and turns it into something manageable: shapes, textures, distances, objects. This is useful, but it comes at a cost. In order to make the world predictable, your brain filters out the underlying continuity and presents you with separation. Not because separation is fundamentally real, but because it is functionally convenient. This is where the illusion becomes deeply convincing. You are not just thinking that you are separate, you are perceiving it. Every glance around you seems to confirm it. Every physical interaction appears to reinforce it. The solidity of matter feels like proof that there are clear lines between you and everything else. But when you look closer, those lines begin to dissolve. What you call a solid object is mostly empty space. The particles that form it are in constant motion, held together by invisible forces. The same is true for your body. There is no fixed boundary where you definitively end and the world begins. There is only a dynamic exchange of energy, happening so seamlessly that your mind edits it out. Even your sense of touch, something that feels so direct and certain, is not what it seems. When you place your hand on a table, there is no actual contact in the way you imagine it. There is a field interaction, a resistance between energies that your brain interprets as solidity. What you feel is not the table itself, but the signal generated by this interaction. So the question becomes unavoidable. If your entire experience of the physical world is a constructed interpretation, how much of the separation you feel is actually real, and how much of it is part of that same construction? This doesn't mean that the world is fake or meaningless. It means that your experience of it is filtered through a system designed for survival, not for truth. And within that system, the illusion of separation is not a flaw. It is a feature. It helps you navigate, make decisions, protect yourself. But it also limits how you understand your connection to everything around you. Because beneath this layer of interpretation, there is no true division. The same fundamental energy that forms your body is not different from what forms the air, the objects around you, or the people you interact with. The distinctions exist at the level of perception, not at the level of essence. And yet your nervous system continues to operate as if those distinctions are absolute. This creates a constant internal conflict. On one level, your biology is built to maintain boundaries, to protect a sense of individuality. On another level, the deeper reality of interconnectedness is always present, quietly contradicting that perception. The tension between these two layers is what you experience as unease, as disconnection, as that subtle feeling that something doesn't quite add up. Your body is trying to maintain a map that no longer fully matches the territory. And this mismatch is not just philosophical. It has real consequences in how you feel every day. The more tightly you hold on to the idea of being a completely separate entity, the more effort your system needs to sustain that belief. It's like trying to freeze something that is naturally fluid. It requires constant tension. That tension doesn't always show up clearly. Sometimes it feels like mental fatigue, sometimes like emotional heaviness, sometimes like a quiet, persistent restlessness that you can't explain. And recently, for many people, this pressure has been increasing. It's as if the system is being pushed beyond what it can comfortably maintain. The old way of perceiving, rigid, divided, isolated, is starting to feel unstable. Not because something is going wrong, but because something deeper is beginning to shift. The question is no longer just whether separation is real. The question is how long your system can keep pretending that it is, especially as the pressure to see beyond this illusion continues to build. The problem becomes critical right now. Maintaining this illusion of isolation required a lot of energy from our ancestors, but with the electromagnetic field intensifying across the planet, continuing to operate as an island is causing a short circuit in your nervous system. That is why you have been feeling an unexplained mental exhaustion lately. The pressure to sustain the mask of separation has reached an unbearable limit. You may have noticed this in subtle ways. It's not always dramatic. It shows up as a kind of fatigue that rest doesn't fully fix. You sleep, but you wake up heavy. You take breaks, but your mind still feels crowded. Even simple decisions start to feel harder than they used to. There's a background strain, like your system is working overtime just to keep things feeling normal. This isn't random. Your body is constantly processing information, not just from your thoughts, but from the environment around you. You are immersed in fields of energy all the time, natural and artificial, visible and invisible. Your nervous system is not separate from this. It is part of it. It responds, adapts, and tries to maintain balance within it. But here's where the tension begins to rise. The more your environment becomes interconnected, fast-moving and saturated with signals, the harder it is for your system to maintain the old model of isolation. That model depends on clear boundaries, on the idea that you are a closed unit, separate from everything else. But the reality your body is sensing is much more fluid, much more interconnected. So your system is caught between two conflicting instructions. Your conditioning tells you, stay separate, protect your boundaries, control your environment. But your deeper biology is constantly receiving input that says, you are already connected, you are part of a larger field. Holding both at the same time creates strain, and that strain accumulates. It's like trying to run two operating systems at once. One is based on separation, the other on connection. They don't fully align, so your energy gets split between them. This is where that feeling of burnout begins to take on a different meaning. It's not just about doing too much, it's about maintaining a perception that no longer fits the reality you are immersed in. The illusion is becoming harder to sustain, and instead of recognizing this shift, most people try to push harder. They double down on control. They try to organize their lives more tightly, think more clearly, fix themselves more aggressively. But this often makes the pressure worse, not better, because the effort itself is still rooted in separation, in the belief that you are an isolated system that needs to manage everything alone. Your nervous system doesn't interpret it that way. It experiences this as resistance, as tension against something that is trying to move naturally. And when that resistance builds, it doesn't just stay in your thoughts, it shows up in your body. Tightness in your chest, restlessness in your limbs, a constant low-level alertness, as if something is off but you can't quite name it. Sometimes it even spikes into anxiety, seemingly out of nowhere. But what if these moments are not signs that something is wrong? What if they are signals that the structure you've been relying on, the sense of being separate, contained, in control, is under pressure because it no longer matches the deeper reality your system is sensing? This changes how you look at the experience. Instead of seeing exhaustion as weakness, you begin to see it as overload. Not from doing too much, but from holding too tightly to a version of reality that requires constant effort to maintain. The illusion demands energy, and right now, that cost is becoming more visible. Because something is shifting, whether you consciously notice it or not. The boundaries feel thinner, the pace feels faster, the sense of disconnection feels more uncomfortable than it used to. What you could ignore before is now harder to tolerate. It's as if your system is being pushed to update, to reorganize around a different understanding of itself. But here's the part that matters most. When this pressure increases, you have two possible responses. You can resist it, tighten further, and try to reinforce the walls. Or you can begin to question whether those walls were ever necessary in the first place. Most people instinctively choose resistance because it feels safer, familiar. But that choice comes at a cost. The more you resist, the more intense the pressure feels. the more your system pushes back, trying to restore balance in a different way. And this is where things can start to feel overwhelming, even frightening, if you don't understand what's happening. Because if the illusion of separation is no longer stable, then what is actually holding everything together? What ensures that you are not lost in this vast field of connection? This is where a deeper principle comes into focus, one that doesn't rely on effort, control, or maintaining boundaries. A principle that shows you that connection is not something you create or manage. It is something that has never been broken. But the answer to this weight brings immediate relief. Quantum entanglement proves that particles that were once connected continue to exchange information instantly, no matter the distance. Since you are made of the same stardust as everything that exists, your consciousness is already exchanging data with the entire universe. Understanding this mechanism lifts a massive burden off your shoulders. You don't need to make an effort to connect, because you were never disconnected. Let that sink in for a moment, not as an idea but as a possibility you allow yourself to feel. All the effort you've been making to reach something, to feel closer, to belong, to be aligned, may have been based on a misunderstanding. Not a mistake, but a misunderstanding shaped by the illusion you were taught to trust. Because if connection is already a constant, then the tension you feel is not coming from lack. It's coming from interference. It's like trying to tune into a signal that is already playing, but your receiver is full of static. Entanglement points to something simple but deeply unsettling for the thinking mind. Distance does not break connection. Once two particles interact, they remain linked in a way that bypasses space as you understand it. Now expand that idea beyond particles. Your body, your brain, your awareness, all of it emerged from the same source as everything else. There was no moment where you were cut off. So the question shifts. If you are already connected, why does it feel like you're not? The answer is not out there. It's in the layer of interpretation your mind places on top of experience. The illusion doesn't erase connection. It hides it behind constant mental noise, thoughts about the past, worries about the future, comparisons, judgments, internal dialogues that never fully stop. All of this acts like interference, making something continuous feel fragmented. And because this interference is constant, you start to believe that fragmentation is the truth. But there are moments when the signal comes through clearly. Think about a time when you felt deeply present. Maybe you were listening to music and for a few seconds there was no you analyzing it, just the sound and the experience happening as one. Or when you locked eyes with someone and there was a brief sense of understanding that didn't need words. In those moments, there was no effort to connect, no reaching, no gap. That's not something you created. That's something you stopped interrupting. This is where entanglement becomes more than a concept. It becomes something you can begin to recognize in your own experience, not as a dramatic event, but as a quiet shift, a softening of the need to control, to chase, to define everything. Because if connection is constant, then your role is not to build it. Your role is to stop distorting it. And this changes how you relate to everything. When someone doesn't respond the way you expected, the old pattern says, "Something is wrong. I need to fix this." But through a different lens, you start to see that the connection itself hasn't disappeared. What's changed is the form it's taking and your interpretation of it. When you feel alone, instead of immediately trying to escape that feeling, you begin to notice it without labeling it as a problem. You stay with the sensation and something subtle happens. The intensity shifts, not because you forced it, but because you stopped feeding the idea that you were cut off. This is where the illusion begins to lose its grip. Not all at once, and not in a way that feels overwhelming, but gradually, like fog thinning as the light increases. You don't break the illusion. You see through it little by little until it no longer holds the same authority over your perception. But there is something important to understand here. Seeing through the illusion doesn't mean your sense of self disappears. It doesn't mean you stop being an individual or lose your identity. In fact, something more balanced begins to emerge. Because if you are always connected, then what is the role of the part of you that feels separate? The voice in your head, the preferences, the personality, the boundaries you experience. What are they for? This is where many people get confused. They think awakening to connection means rejecting the self entirely, fighting the ego, trying to dissolve it or silence it. But that creates a new kind of conflict, because the part of you that feels separate was never designed to be your enemy. It was designed to help you navigate this experience from a specific point of view. And if you misunderstand that, you risk creating resistance in a different form, not against the world, but against yourself. So instead of trying to eliminate that part of you, something else becomes possible. You begin to understand what it actually is and why it was never the problem to begin with. Here is the truth that breaks all common sense of traditional spirituality. You have always been told that you must destroy your ego to evolve. Forget that. Your ego is not a cosmic mistake. It is simply a virtual reality lens that infinite consciousness put on to experience life from your unique perspective. The ego was just a biological survival tool, not an enemy to be fought. And yet, for a long time, you may have treated it exactly like that. Something to silence, control, or even eliminate. Every anxious thought, every moment of insecurity, every emotional reaction, it's easy to label all of that as the problem, as if there's something inside you working against your growth. But look closer. What you call ego is not a single thing. It's a collection of patterns, memories, learned behaviors, protective responses. It's the part of you that learned how to navigate the world, avoid pain, seek safety, and create a sense of identity. Without it, you wouldn't know your name, your preferences, or how to respond to basic situations. The issue was never its existence. The issue is forgetting that it's a lens. When you wear a lens for too long, you stop noticing that you're wearing it. It becomes invisible. And when that happens, everything you see starts to feel like absolute truth. Every judgment feels final. Every fear feels justified. Every story your mind tells feels real. This is how the illusion sustains itself in a more subtle way. Before it appeared as separation between you and the world. Now, it appears as separation within you. A split between the part that wants peace and the part that seems to disturb it. And if you believe that one part must defeat the other, you create internal conflict that never fully resolves. You end up fighting your own operating system. Notice what happens when a difficult thought appears. Maybe it's self-doubt or a fear about the future. Almost instantly, another part of your mind reacts. I shouldn't be thinking this. I need to get rid of this. That reaction creates tension, not because of the original thought, but because of the resistance to it. Now there are two layers of struggle, the initial signal and the fight against the signal, and this is where things become exhausting. Because no matter how hard you try, you cannot permanently eliminate a system that was designed to protect you. The ego doesn't disappear under pressure. It adapts, it hides, it comes back in different forms. So the more you fight it, the more complex it becomes. But something shifts when you stop treating it as an enemy. Instead of pushing it away, you begin to observe it. Not to fix it, not to judge it, but simply to see it clearly. And in that observation, a small but powerful gap appears. A space between you and the pattern. In that space, something interesting happens. The thought is still there, but it no longer has the same authority. It becomes just another event passing through your awareness, not a command you have to follow. The emotion may still arise, but it moves differently when it's not being resisted. This is not suppression, it's clarity. And this clarity reveals something that changes everything. The ego is not who you are. It is something you experience, just like a sound, a sensation, or a memory. It's part of the interface, not the source. The illusion made you believe that the voice in your head was your identity, that every thought defined you. But as you begin to observe instead of react, that identification starts to loosen. You don't lose your sense of self. You gain flexibility within it. You can still think, plan, decide, express yourself, but there is less tension behind it, less urgency, less need to defend or prove anything. Because you are no longer trapped inside the lens, you are aware of it. And when that happens, the ego starts to function the way it was always meant to. Not as a ruler, but as a tool. It helps you move through the world, but it doesn't define your reality. It offers perspectives, but it doesn't control your perception. It becomes lighter, more adaptable, less rigid. But there is an important detail here that often goes unnoticed. Even when you begin to see through the ego, there is a tendency to fall back into old habits. to rebuild subtle forms of control, to use the ego itself to try to master this new understanding, to turn awareness into another goal, another identity, another way to feel separate again. And this is where the next layer of risk appears, because if you don't recognize this pattern, you can end up strengthening the illusion in a more refined way, not by rejecting the ego, but by unconsciously using it to resist the natural flow of life itself. The real danger is not having an ego. It is forgetting that you are wearing the lens. If you continue insisting on building mental walls to defend yourself from life, the force of this new unified frequency will shatter those glass structures by force. Every anxiety attack you experience is simply your body resisting merging with its true origin. We must deactivate this resistance before it paralyzes you, because resistance doesn't always look like struggle. Sometimes it looks like control, like trying to organize every outcome, predict every reaction, and secure every possible future. On the surface, it seems responsible, even intelligent. But underneath, there is a quiet refusal to trust the flow of life as it is unfolding. And that refusal creates friction. You can feel it when things don't go according to plan. A small disruption turns into a wave of tension. Your mind speeds up, searching for solutions, trying to regain stability. It tells you that if you don't fix this quickly, something will fall apart. But what's actually happening is simpler than that. You are pushing against movement. Life is not static. It doesn't hold still so you can feel safe. It shifts, responds, evolves. And when you try to freeze it into something predictable, you end up fighting a current that is much larger than your individual control. That fight doesn't always look dramatic, but it drains your energy in a constant, subtle way. This is where anxiety begins to make more sense, not as a random malfunction, but as a signal of resistance. Your system is trying to move, to adapt, to stay in sync with a deeper rhythm. But your mind keeps interrupting, trying to redirect everything into familiar patterns. The result is tension between what is happening and what you think should be happening. And the body feels that conflict immediately. Your chest tightens. Your breathing becomes shallow. Your thoughts loop faster, trying to resolve something that isn't meant to be controlled in the first place. The more you try to stop the feeling, the stronger it becomes. Not because it's overpowering you, but because you are pushing against it. It's like trying to hold back a wave with your hands. For a moment, you might feel like you're managing it, but the pressure builds, and eventually it breaks through, often more intensely than before. This is why cycles of anxiety can feel unpredictable. It's not the wave that is unstable, it's the resistance to it. The illusion plays a central role here because it convinces you that you are separate from what is happening, that the experience is something external, something you need to defend yourself against, so you build strategies, mental walls, layers of protection designed to keep discomfort out and control in. But those walls don't just block discomfort, they also block flow. And when the natural movement of your system is restricted, the pressure doesn't disappear. It accumulates. It looks for openings. And when it finds them, it can feel overwhelming, as if something inside you is breaking. In a way, something is. Not you, but the structure you've been using to hold everything together. And here is where a different approach becomes possible. Instead of asking, "How do I stop this feeling?" you begin to ask, "What happens if I stop resisting it?" Not as an idea, but as an actual experiment. In the middle of the tension, instead of tightening further, you allow a small amount of space. You don't try to solve the moment. You let it move. At first, this can feel counterintuitive, even risky. Your mind may say, "If I let go, this will get worse." But if you stay with it, something unexpected begins to happen. The intensity shifts. Not instantly and not in a dramatic way, but enough for you to notice that the experience is not as fixed as it seemed. The wave rises, but it also falls. The sensation changes. The thoughts lose some of their grip. And in that movement, you start to see that what felt solid is actually fluid. This is how resistance begins to dissolve, not by force, but by understanding, by seeing that the energy you were fighting is not separate from you. It is part of a process that is trying to restore balance, not destroy it. And the more you allow this process, the less threatening it feels. But there is a key detail that makes all the difference. Allowance is not passivity. It's not giving up or becoming indifferent. It's a shift in how you relate to what is happening. You are still present, still aware, but you are no longer trying to control every movement. You are participating instead of resisting. And this is where something subtle but powerful begins to open. Because when resistance decreases, perception changes. You start to notice things you couldn't see before. Patterns become clearer, reactions slow down. There is more space between stimulus and response. And in that space, a different kind of choice becomes available. Not the choice driven by fear or urgency, but one grounded in clarity. But most people miss this moment, because as soon as things begin to feel more stable, the mind rushes back in, trying to take control again. It wants to define the experience, to turn it into a method, a rule, something it can hold on to. And in doing so, it subtly rebuilds the illusion. So the question becomes more precise now. If fighting the current creates tension and allowing it creates space, what is the exact point where this shift happens? What is the simple, direct action that interrupts the pattern in real time without turning it into another form of control? Because there is a way to do this, and it is much simpler than your mind expects. The definitive solution I promised earlier does not require you to escape to the mountains to meditate. It is a rapid shift of focus. From today on, when the fear of separation arises, you will not fight it. You will step back and become the silent witness. The moment you simply observe your mind creating the wall, the barrier loses energy and collapses on its own. In quantum physics, it is the act of observation that collapses the probability wave. This sounds almost too simple, and that's exactly why it is often overlooked. Your mind is used to complexity. It believes that real change must involve effort, time, and control. So when something this direct appears, it tends to dismiss it or try to turn it into another technique to master. But this is not about mastering anything. It's about seeing. Right now, as you read this, there are thoughts moving through your mind. Some are focused on these words, others may be drifting, like reactions, doubts, agreements, distractions. Normally you are inside that stream, carried by it without noticing. But the moment you become aware of the thoughts themselves, something shifts. You are no longer fully identified with them. That shift is the key. It's small, almost invisible, but it changes the entire structure of your experience. Because the illusion depends on identification. It needs you to believe that every thought is you, that every feeling defines reality, that every reaction must be followed. Without that identification, the illusion has nothing to hold on to. So the practice, if we can even call it that, is not to stop thinking and not to force yourself into calm. It is to notice. When a thought appears saying, "I feel disconnected," you don't argue with it. You don't try to replace it with something positive. You simply see it as a thought. The moment you do that, a space opens. The thought is still there, but it is no longer absolute. It becomes something you are aware of, not something you are trapped inside. The same applies to emotions. When a wave of anxiety rises, your usual reaction might be to resist it or analyze it. But instead you pause just enough to feel it directly. Not the story around it, but the raw sensation in your body. The tightness, the movement, the energy. And at the same time you notice that you are the one aware of it. There is the sensation and there is the awareness of the sensation. They are not the same. This distinction is where the illusion begins to dissolve in real time, because the feeling may still be present, but the sense of being overwhelmed by it starts to loosen. You are no longer inside the storm. You are aware of the storm, and awareness itself does not struggle. It doesn't try to fix, control, or escape. It simply allows. And in that allowance, something natural happens. The energy that was being sustained by resistance begins to move. It rises, peaks, and then fades, just like any other process in the body. Not because you forced it to, but because you stopped interrupting it. This is the part that changes everything. You begin to realize that the illusion was never something solid you had to break. It was a pattern that needed your constant participation to exist. And observation quietly withdraws that participation. But there is a subtle trap here. The mind can take this understanding and turn it into another goal. It can say, "I need to stay aware all the time," or "I'm doing it wrong if the feeling comes back." And just like that, it recreates pressure. It turns observation into effort and effort into control, and the illusion rebuilds itself in a more refined form. So the invitation is even simpler than the mind would like. You don't need to maintain constant awareness. You don't need to get it perfect. You only need to notice when you are lost, and in that noticing, you are already back. No judgment, no correction, just recognition, again and again. Sometimes you will remember quickly. Sometimes it will take longer. Both are part of the same process. What matters is not how long you stay aware, but that you see the moment you were not, because that moment is enough to break the pattern. And over time, something begins to stabilize, not a rigid state, but a natural tendency. You start to return to awareness more easily. The gaps between reactions become wider. The pull of automatic thoughts becomes weaker. Life doesn't stop being dynamic. Challenges still appear. Emotions still move. But your relationship to them changes. There is less urgency, less fear, less need to control every outcome. And in that space, a different kind of intelligence begins to guide your actions. Not the analytical voice that tries to predict everything, but a quieter sense of knowing, a responsiveness that comes from being present instead of being lost in interpretation. This is where the shift becomes real, not as an idea, but as a lived experience. But there is a specific moment each day when this becomes even more accessible, almost as if your system naturally opens a door for it. And most people pass through that moment without ever noticing what is available there. And this is why tonight, when you lie down, the real transformation happens. As you close your eyes, your brain slows down from alert beta waves into deeper relaxation states. This is the perfect opening in your biological system. Instead of filling this transition with worries about tomorrow, you will simply allow the sensation of your body to dissolve into the darkness of the room. Tonight is the turning point where your subconscious signs peace with existence. There is a moment every night that most people overlook. It happens quietly without announcement. Your body begins to soften. Your thoughts start to lose their sharp edges. The urgency of the day fades, and something more fluid begins to take over. This transition is not just about sleep. It is a natural shift in how your mind processes reality. During the day, your brain is focused on separation. It organizes, categorizes, compares. It keeps you functioning as an individual moving through a world of objects and responsibilities. This is useful, but it also reinforces the illusion again and again, hour after hour. At night, that structure loosens. The boundaries your mind works so hard to maintain begin to relax. The sense of me versus the world becomes less rigid. You are no longer actively managing your identity, and in that softening, something deeper becomes accessible. But here is what usually happens. Instead of allowing this transition, your mind fills it with noise, replaying conversations, anticipating problems, creating scenarios that pull you back into the same patterns of control and separation. Even as your body is trying to release, your thoughts keep rebuilding the illusion. So the opportunity passes unnoticed. Tonight you approach it differently. As you lie down before sleep takes over, bring your attention to something simple. The weight of your body against the surface beneath you, the subtle movement of your breath, the way the room feels around you, even with your eyes closed. You're not trying to relax. You are noticing what is already happening. At first, your mind may resist. It may try to pull you back into thinking, into planning, into analyzing. That's fine, you don't fight it. You just notice that too. Thought appears and you see it. Sensation appears and you feel it. No effort to change anything. And slowly something begins to shift. The sense of being a fixed point starts to soften. Your body feels less like a solid object and more like a field of sensations. The boundary between you and the space around you becomes less clear. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, almost unnoticeable way. This is where the illusion weakens. Not because you forced it to disappear, but because you stopped reinforcing it at the exact moment your system was ready to let it go. The transition into sleep becomes something different. Not an escape, but a return. a return to a state where separation is not the dominant experience, and your subconscious is paying attention. It absorbs patterns without effort. It learns from repetition, from emotional tone, from what you consistently allow. When you enter sleep from a place of observation instead of resistance, you are teaching your system something new. You are showing it that it doesn't need to hold tension to stay safe, that it can let go. This doesn't mean your night will be perfect, or that your mind will suddenly go silent. Thoughts may still come. Sensations may still shift. But your relationship to them is different. There is less involvement, less attachment, and that changes how deeply your system can rest. Because true rest is not just physical. It is the absence of internal conflict, the absence of trying to control what is naturally unfolding. When that conflict decreases even slightly, your entire system recalibrates. You may not notice it immediately, but something is integrating beneath the surface. And when morning comes, the effects begin to show in subtle ways. A little more space between thoughts, a slightly calmer response to situations that would have triggered you before, a sense that things are moving, but you are not being pulled in the same way. Not because you achieved something overnight, but because you allowed a natural process to happen. And the more you repeat this, the more familiar it becomes. The transition into sleep is no longer a random drift into unconsciousness. It becomes a doorway, a consistent moment where the grip of the illusion can loosen without force. But this is where something interesting begins to unfold. Because as this pattern stabilizes, changes don't stay confined to the night. They begin to appear during the day in ways that are often unexpected. Small shifts at first, then patterns you can't ignore. By allowing this illusion to dissolve during sleep, the person who wakes up tomorrow will no longer be a prisoner of the fear of scarcity. Unlikely synchronicities will begin to appear in your routine, not because you have become a master at attracting things, but because you have finally accepted that reality does not happen to you, it responds to you. The end of the sense of separation instantly restores your natural power to create your own life. At first, these changes are easy to dismiss. A conversation flows more smoothly than usual. You think about someone and they reach out. A small decision you make without overthinking leads to a better outcome than expected. None of this feels dramatic, but there is a subtle difference in how it unfolds. Less force, less friction, more alignment. The old pattern would call this coincidence, but something in you starts to notice that it's happening more often than chance would suggest. Not because the world suddenly changed, but because your way of interacting with it did. When the illusion of separation weakens, you stop acting from a place of lack. And when that internal pressure disappears, your choices become clearer, simpler, more direct. You hesitate less. You overanalyze less. You respond instead of react. And that shift alone begins to reorganize your reality in ways that feel almost surprising. Because before, much of your energy was tied up in managing fear. Fear of not having enough, not being enough, not getting it right. Even when you were moving forward, there was tension underneath. A need to control outcomes, to secure results, to protect yourself from uncertainty. Now something loosens. You still care, you still act. But the weight behind your actions is different. You are no longer trying to extract something from life. You are participating in it, and that changes the feedback you receive. People respond differently to you, even if they can't explain why. Situations unfold with less resistance. You begin to notice openings where before you only saw obstacles, not because you are forcing anything, but because you are no longer narrowing your perception through the filter of fear. The illusion used to limit what you could see. It made you focus on what was missing, on what could go wrong, on what needed to be fixed. And in doing so, it shaped your experience to match that focus. Not in a mystical way, but in a very practical one. Your attention guided your decisions, and your decisions shaped your outcomes. Now your attention is shifting, and with it, your results. But there is something important to understand here, so you don't fall into another trap. This is not about controlling reality with your mind. It's not about trying to manifest specific outcomes or turning this into a new form of effort. The moment you start chasing results again, the illusion quietly rebuilds itself. The tension returns. The sense of separation creeps back in, because you move from participation back into pursuit. The real shift is more subtle than that. It's in how you relate to what is happening. You begin to trust your responses more than your predictions. You act when something feels clear, not when it feels guaranteed. You allow uncertainty to exist without immediately trying to eliminate it. And in that space, something unexpected happens. You become more effective, not because you are controlling more, but because you are interfering less. Your actions come from a place that is less clouded by fear and overthinking. They are more aligned with the actual situation, not with the story your mind is telling about it. And this is where those synchronicities start to make sense. They are not random. They are the natural result of clearer perception and cleaner action. When you are not constantly distorting reality through the illusion, you begin to see connections that were always there. You notice timing, patterns, opportunities that used to pass by unnoticed. It's like tuning a signal. The information was always present, but now you can receive it more clearly. And as this continues, your sense of identity begins to shift as well. You no longer see yourself as someone trying to survive in a disconnected world. You start to feel like part of a larger process, not in an abstract way, but in how you move, decide, and respond every day. There is less isolation in your experience, less need to defend, less urgency to prove, and more space to simply be and act from that place. But this is not the end of the shift, because even as this new way of experiencing life becomes more familiar, there is one final piece that brings everything together. Not as an idea, but as something you can recognize directly without effort, something that has been present the entire time, quietly holding everything in place. The great illusion that you are a lost fragment has ended. You were never alone, for the simple mathematical and spiritual reason that there has never been an outside to isolate you. The emptiness in your chest is only filled when you realize that you are the infinite space that contains all things. Tonight, release once and for all the weight of your defenses. You are the entire universe, and it is only just beginning to awaken through you. From this point on, life is no longer something you chase. It is something you meet, moment by moment, without the filter of separation. The illusion may try to return in small ways, but now you can see it, and seeing is enough. If you made it this far, write in the comments, "I am not separate anymore." This simple act grounds what you felt here. If this resonated with you, watch one of the videos on your screen now. And if you want to go deeper and support this space, consider becoming a member. Exclusive content is coming soon.